Welcome to How to Live Slow, the podcast where we discuss slow living for the modern woman and help you design an intentionally slower family life. I'm Rachelle Glendon, your personal slow living coach and host of this podcast. I know all about busy, but I love living slow. Enjoy the show. Well, hello and welcome to episode 100 of the How to Live Slow podcast. I cannot believe I've reached 100 episodes of this podcast. Wow. So today's episode, I thought I should do something very special for the episode. So I want to share with you a collection of thoughts about stretching your timeline. It's about how to slow down, which is what this whole podcast is all about, specifically on slowing down your experience of time and increasing the fulfillment you get out of each phase of life. So I've got lots to share on this. I've also written a Substack article for this because I'm going to be launching my Substack very soon. So stick around if you want to hear about that. But I thought it would be remiss of me not to sort of share some updates and thoughts and stats, I guess, on my podcast over the last 3 years, because would you believe today is the 21st of April 2023, and I just had a look because I thought I haven't checked the stats on what's going on with my podcast for a long time, but I just checked, and the very first episode 1, came out on the 16th of April 2020. So I totally missed that the podcast has also turned 3 this week, which is crazy to think. So I've averaged over 33 episodes a year over the last 3 years. I cannot believe it. That blows my mind, especially because the podcast started out as a weekly thing. I've had lots and lots of guests as well. And most of last year it was just me recording podcasts, and it was fortnightly. And I also had a big break as well. I posted an episode on the 20th of September, and then the next one wasn't until 20th of February. So I had a big break when I went away with my family for a few months. So I just want to say as well, I do very minimal marketing with my podcast, which I don't regret. I do the amount that I have the capacity for, right? So I share that there's a new podcast episode on Instagram and on Facebook, and I email my people who are subscribed to my email list. I share with them that when a new podcast has gone live. I sometimes share it in a Facebook group or two that I'm in, but generally speaking, that's about it. So considering that, I don't promote it, I have never advertised, I'm not on any podcasting networks or any you can join groups where people will, you post it and share and you're supposed to listen and whatever, all of those collaborational type things. I don't do any of that. I guess I probably could, and I probably should, to give it the justice it deserves, but I don't, because I make the podcast for you, the people who listen to it, but I also make it for me. It's a creative outlet. So as you know, recently I've started, a business, going more into the business side of things and doing more coaching and things like that. If you've listened to the last few episodes, you'll know that that's a goal for this year. If you've listened to my episode on Project 4440, which incidentally is one of the more popular episodes, then you'll know that I'm building a business based off the back of Slow Living and How to Live Slow, the podcast. And that's going really, really well, actually. So I feel that I'm doing what I have got the capacity for, and it feels really good. But anyway, that said, so just if you could observe that, and you can see there on Instagram that I've got about 1,700 followers. So even that's not a huge following either. That said, I've had roughly 40,000 total downloads of the podcast, which equates to about 400 listens per episode. And that's fairly consistent. The earlier ones, the first 10 sort of tend to be listened to a lot. People go back and see. But the middle ones are all averaging about 200 to 300. And the last 10 since episode 90 or so, they're well over the 500 mark. Some of them, there's 1 or 2 that are getting close to 1,000 downloads per episode. So it just sort of shows that things are growing. They are consistently tracking up. And as and when I get more, understanding about marketing and all of that stuff, I'm assuming it's going to grow. But those are fairly realistic numbers, I assume. Like, I would not have a clue where I am on any kind of charts. I'm assuming with, I think that those are fairly low numbers. You do see some podcasts where they say, oh, just hit first 100,000 downloads or whatever. But that's not the goal for me. I'm not trying to get onto any charts or anything like that. Because for me, the fulfillment comes from doing something and showing the people who want to do something similar, who want a creative outlet, who want to slow down their lives, that it is actually possible. And I want to model that for the people who care. And that is hopefully you. So I just wanted to share that. Those are the few stats, which I think is very interesting. So anyway, lots of learnings have happened. And I enjoy creating these podcasts. So I will continue them on a fortnightly basis, for the foreseeable future. I've got a few beautiful guests coming up. I'm particularly focusing on guests who have written books because I think it's really important to share messages and give people opportunities to share their work. I think that's really cool because there are some amazing authors out there who have small but mighty followings. And that's another thing, right? I have had, I think, well over 40 people on this podcast. At least 30 of those people, this podcast was their first go of being on a podcast. So I sort of see that as a little bit of, I feel like rather than going after all the big names and having people with huge followings to grow my audience, I love connecting with people who are at the very beginning, or they've written a book or they've got some beautiful ideas and they want to get started in their own things. And you don't have to have 50 million followers to have a great message. And that's what I think I've hoped to have shared. Like, if you've listened to any previous episodes, you'll know that I've had some amazing conversations with some incredible people. And more often than not, it's their first time ever being on a podcast. So I feel really grateful and privileged to be able to do that and to have these conversations and to sort of share that it's not just the industry leaders who are doing good work. Just because you're the loudest doesn't mean you're the best, is basically the message I hope to be conveying in a sense. So with that said, I just want to say a huge, huge thank you for your support over the years. 3 years is such a long time, and it blows my mind that I'm still here creating it, actually, and that I'm still interested in this topic. I still really value the ideas behind slow living, and now I'm also doing my writing, which is also another way that there's some magic that happens when you sit down to write, and I just love it. So yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to be doing, so the things that are going to be changing as far as the podcast is concerned, is that when there's a solo episode, it's actually going to be a full-length article on Substack that you'll be able to also read. So there'll be audio, it'll be, me talking as an intro like I'm doing now, and then I will cut through to whatever the article is about. So this will be fortnightly. So there'll probably be one a month that's like that, and then I'll have a guest on the alternate fortnight. And I think that that's roughly how I'm going to run it from now. So I hope that's okay. Okay, so on with the main part of the show. I want to talk about stretching your timelines. And the reason I want to talk about this is because slow living, so many of us, if you're listening here, you're probably a mother with relatively young children. And it can feel like you're stagnating in that, or that every day is monotonous and that you're not achieving any goals. And there's this real tension around, wanting to figure out how to do less in any given day. But I also want to bring to your mind the idea that not everything has to happen now, meaning that not just the things that you have to do today. Like maybe this phase of your life is just going to be hectic. But if you think, we can get really stuck in the idea that what our life is now is what it's always going to be. And that's not actually true, because we live in this world that's so focused on immediacy, and it can feel like you're never going to be not busy. But if you think about stretching your timeline out all the way to the end of your life, one day you won't have little kids at home. One day you won't be working full time, or whatever it is, Think about it from that point of view. Then you can be in each moment more effectively, knowing that change is inevitably going to come. So I think that's where I'm going with stretching your timeline, seeing through to what is coming in your life so that you can be more present in each moment that you have. And so here's where I'm going to go with this. So in my Substack article, I start with saying stretching your timelines is about getting out from under the immediacy of modern goals. So I've got a lot to say. And I start with saying that I think modern life is almost too convenient. You know, the story that I had in mind when I wrote this part was like when we went to the USA, I ordered a coffee and the lady poured me a coffee and then gave me like 8 little mini plastic cups of milk. And then I had another coffee and she gave me another 8 little mini plastic cups of milk. And all to be convenient. And I was like, that's actually so inconvenient. I've now got to sit here and take all the tiny lids off, you know, and I've got all this waste and rubbish. So I ended up with like 16 little plastic tubs just so that I could have 2 coffees. And it just seems like, the milk in the little plastic tub is so convenient to the point that it's inconvenient, because if she's walking around with her little pot of coffee, why can't she also just walk around with the milk? You know, like, and I think like the world has gone crazy over convenience and also just like online ordering. Like it used to be before COVID, like we were getting to the stage where you would order something and it would be delivered like almost that afternoon or the next day. And now you order something on a Wednesday and you're definitely not going to get it by the weekend. So, you know, and that's like, you know, sort of sending people into a tizzy because now we're not getting our orders so quickly. So I think, we've gotten so used to not being able to wait, not having to wait for things. And so the main issue that I have like with social media and being online in general is the way it snatches our time away. And I don't mean in the sense of like scrolling or, you know, because notifications or whatever. I just mean that actually literally everything's become so convenient that we've forgotten how to wait for stuff. You know, you have an idea. So you're like, okay, for example, another example of this is me wanting to do my class. I think I spoke about this in the last episode. I wanted to run this mini class and normally I would have this idea and then I'd be like, okay, I've got to act now. I'm going to host the class next week. But that doesn't give me enough time to talk about it and to share it and to send emails, you know, where I'm not feeling like I'm bothering people. So I get an opportunity to share it 3 or 4 times and then I launch it officially or whatever, like to give myself the space. But I was so caught up in the immediacy of things that I was like, all right, I've had this idea and now I need to action it. And that timeline between having an idea and wanting to take action or have it be successful is so short now, you know, but I think there is really magic in waiting for things or like planning things out properly and giving yourself enough time to do things effectively. Because I think that this pull to have instantaneous results or instant success causes so much like anxiety, right? Anxious tension. And we put too much pressure on ourselves to be an instant success. And I am using my podcast, for example, as a perfect, you know, example of that. 3 years, 100 episodes, and 40,000 downloads. Some people would call that a failure. That's not enough for a lot of people. But for me, it's the perfect amount. I know that if there's an average, say, of 400 people listening to each episode, there is no way you would get me standing up here in front of a room speaking about what I'm speaking about in front of 400 people. No way. But I can sit in my room and record this and reach those 400 people and feel really good about it. But for other people, that's not enough. They want more. Or, you know, that there is not just individual people want more, but there is this pull as a culture to want more or to think that, you know, only 400 is not enough or whatever. So that's my little rant. But my proposal for you is to practice detaching from the immediacy of achievement. So allow yourself to sit in that tension of wanting something, that knowing that it might not happen for years or even decades, but devote your life to it. So another example of this is when I was 30, I committed to, I want to walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain. It's an 800-kilometer walk. It takes about 4 or 5 weeks. And I committed to getting that done by the time I'm 40. I'm still 3 years away from that, but it's a 10-year long goal. I've definitely spoken about that on the podcast before, but that's what I mean. Like, I know that it's something I want to do, but I've let myself off the hook of just like letting it happen within that decade. Hopefully it does. It'll probably be more like 43 by the time I actually do it, but still, I've set that in my mind. That is a long-term goal that I will achieve one day. So that now I can be as present as possible in each season so that I can enjoy it. Because also presence, I believe, has a cumulative effect. if you're present now with what's going on in your life now, like with your little kids, you get to enjoy being present with them when they're teenagers. Hopefully you've built the relationship with them so that they're willing to spend time with you even though they're teenagers. And then the next phase, like you get to enjoy the fact of like being childless again, like being, having an empty nest, but you get to have all of those beautiful memories and know that you did a good job and not regret, and we move through our lives. And that presence has a cumulative effect. So your satisfaction in life builds as you gather the lessons and the experiences of life well lived, knowing that you were really present for each phase. So kind of related to that is the idea of visualizing your 80-year-old self, like feeling into like, what would she say to you? I think she would say, slow down. There's absolutely no rush. Everything that's meant for you will come your way as it's meant to. And I think she would want you to be fully available for it all. Every joy, every problem, every special moment, every feeling, emotion, every memory. She'd encourage you to really be in it, to really allow yourself to experience all of life's transitions, adolescence, matrescence, sagescence. Sagescence, by the way, is a new term that Jane Hardwicke Collins has coined that is to replace the word menopause. But all of these life transitions, as life unfolds, and I think we think about our 80-year-old selves, like don't let her feel unfulfilled. Yeah, that's my thoughts. So what would it look like? Now, this might be revolutionary, but stick with me. Not revolutionary, but almost like you shouldn't say that. But what would it look like if you just didn't have any goals for a while? Like, what would it be like? How would it feel in your guts? Like, what's your instant response when I say, maybe just don't have any goals? Allow yourself the one goal of just not having any goals. Just be in your life as it is now. Like, there are actually some times in life that are suited to releasing yourself from the pressure of having a goal. Early motherhood, particularly, like, you really deserve to be in the baby bubble, right? You shouldn't be having to be focusing on bouncing back or getting back to this or that, like, fitting back into your jeans or your bikini or whatever. Like, that's all of those goals. You should be in your baby bubble. There are no shoulds in life, but I think you deserve to be in your baby bubble. Grief is another time when not having goals is really important. Like, apart from getting through the grief, actively taking time to celebrate the achievement of one goal before taking on more is another time that might be worthwhile having, like, no goals, like let yourself off the hook for a bit. Even winter knows the power of pausing. There is nothing to do in winter but rest. That's kind of like having no goals. Because a fallow period after growth looks like stillness, but there is actually a lot going on. There's restoration, gathering of resources, intensifying your energy, all of that stuff. So can you imagine creating a bubble within which you don't expect too much of yourself? Like, you can pare back to the essentials. And as I've said before, like, it's okay to coast along in life sometimes. Like, that can be true self-care. Sometimes you just need to, like, coast along and get through each phase or each day. Some people might come to this, like, feeling of needing to do nothing and have no goals because they're burnt out. And if you're listening to this and thinking it's not possible for you to do any less or to have no goals because you've got so much going on, may I gently suggest that maybe you are closer to burnout than you might think, because we are not machines and rest is essential. So here's another little side note. Not having a goal to work towards could be your goal. Just try it for a little while and see what happens. Like, do you really think you're going to sit on the couch for the rest of your days if you don't have anything to work towards? Or could it be that what you truly want emerges from the depths? What if having no goal is the secret to getting what you truly want? Like, slowing down and actually listening into what it is that you actually want to do. Because I don't think many of us have ever actually done that, like truly slowed down and focused on, well, what do I actually want to do? Have we ever given ourselves enough time and space for the real version of ourselves to come forward? So an effective way to stretch your timelines, like, if you go through this process of, like, I guess you could call it like de-goaling your life, then you can approach, this is the next phase for me. I would call this like my effective way to stretch your timeline. So once you've experienced what it feels like to have no goals for a period of time, you could try this alternative to setting SMART goals. We've all heard of SMART goals. They've got to be specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. if you throw that away, and I love to use the idea of slow goals instead. That is that they are sustainable and seasonal. We'll get back to that in a minute. They're longer term, you have ownership over them, and they feel worthwhile. Using this framework is kind of how I do things now. So I sort of set my timeline for what does my 80-year-old self, if I was 80 and I'm reflecting on my life, what would I want my life to be? And then I kind of work backwards. All right, well, how do I make that happen? So I tune into my own desires rather than looking for external metrics of achievement. I'm not ticking off lists of things that you should do by certain ages, that sort of thing. And then I find that the things you set out to achieve have much more deeper meaning for you individually. They feel worthwhile and you are willing to see them through. And this is important, no matter how long it takes. So you don't have to have a timeline necessarily on a lot of stuff. If you can trust yourself to go, okay, you don't need to have a deadline. You can say, all right, well, I'm going to put in the work. I don't need to have a carrot and stick, like forcing myself to do things because I actually want to do it. Like there are going to be hard parts about it. And that's about developing self-trust and becoming the kind of person who does what you say you're going to do. But this is also, this is a development process. This is the real fulfillment, is becoming the kind of person who you can rely on, because life throws up tangents, procrastination, distraction, and that all might seem in a SMART goals way, that would probably seem like you're failing or you're losing focus or you're not getting on track, and you make yourself feel bad about that. But if you trust in yourself to course correct, to come back to your goals in the long term, and to let yourself learn the lessons that come up in those tangents and in that procrastination and in the things that distract you or interest you, you might find that each time that happens, you're actually getting wisdom that you didn't know you needed to help you see the project through even in an even better way, or to see your life or your goal or whatever it is. Because you're never actually going backwards, and life does have a way of showing you what you need to know. I think you've got a lot of evidence, if you think about it, of that being true. So, I love my analogies, and I really love the seasonal analogy. Life happens in phases and stages. And I think that goal setting is one of the ways that this seasonal approach really works effectively and especially well. So let's look at it from that perspective. The first part is S for slow is seasonal. So if you work with the seasons in that sense, then spring would be the phase in which you set a goal, make the plan, and plant the metaphorical seeds for what you want to grow by achieving that goal. Then in the summer phase is all about active growth, where you do the work, you seek external resources to help you move forward, and you do the execution of the actual project. Autumn would then be the time to finalize, to deliver the project, or, whatever the thing might be, to harvest what you've planted and to prune back anything, so take away all the stuff that actually ended up being irrelevant, or grabbing the lessons that you've learnt throughout the process. What didn't you enjoy about that? What was a sticking point? That sort of thing. And then between autumn and winter comes the celebration. That's why in autumn, in our real autumn, we have 3 harvest festivals. One, so it's kind of like autumn is this funny liminal one, because you have the reaping and then you have the celebrating. So you want to really take some time to recognize what you've achieved and actually celebrate and reflect. And then in winter, you can go into deeper reflection. You can spend time restoring, slowing down, replenishing your resources, and really being in that fallow phase of, okay, well, what's next? Letting yourself dream about what the next thing might be. And I think that this totally stretches the goal achievement timeline in a really great way. And unlike in the urgency model of setting a SMART goal, with this approach, I personally am much more likely to achieve a goal or finish a project in a way that fulfills and nourishes me, because I'm more discerning over what I say yes to. And I factor in some of those phases. So I have that fallow period for integration, celebration, and reflection. And that just adds to the magic of the experience. I'm not just doing things for the sake of ticking them off. I'm doing them because it feels good. Like, for example, this podcast. I've gotten a lot out of it, and it's a slow, long process and a slow burn. And I am starting to reap the rewards. This is a years-long project, and I would never have stuck to it had I have expected it to have a specific immediate result or a certain financial reward or whatever. Those things will come, and I just trust that process. I'm trusting in that. My time will come with everything that I'm trying to do, if that makes sense. So I'm happy. Yeah, because I did. Like, this advice comes from, it's hard earned. Like, I've spent a lot of time navel gazing, probably too much time, but figuring this stuff out because I'm so interested in it. Because I personally, I did used to commit to really short time frames. Like I said before about, I've had this idea and I'm going to execute it next week. And I inevitably just hit those days where I didn't feel like doing it, or my mind was distracted, I got my period and I felt tired, or I had a headache or whatever, and I wasn't ever able to give my best work. I often scrambled last minute and felt like I just like butched something together. That's not a word, but you know what I mean. And now what I do is I say I need at least a month for most projects. Like, if anything like this, any topic or podcast or Substack or whatever that I'm working on, I need to kind of give that I've got my 4 seasons within my cycle. So my follicular, my ovulation, my luteal, and my menstrual phases of my cycle. I find that if I'm in those 4 different mindsets, I can come at a particular article or piece of content from all 4 phases and add to it and give it more depth and more meaning. And the way that I'm personally feeling, like I've got different thoughts that come up depending. So I like to go for a walk every week, and then I will have ideas. So I've got lots of ideas circling around, and one of my goals has always been to figure out a way to get my thoughts down on paper. So I've started doing that, and that's why Substack is happening, because I have 3 or 4 drafts, and every week I add different bits depending on what I've thought or felt and depending on my phase of my cycle. So it's a really interesting way of practically applying it. And I do get less of that feeling of like, this isn't good work, or this isn't fully finished, or I've forgotten bits and pieces that I wanted to include. I get that. I do actually get more of a sense of like I've completed something properly. Okay, so I really don't mean for this to sound so ranty. I hope it's not coming across as ranty, but I'm still perfecting the way of how to deliver this content while I'm reading, but actually make it sound like I'm saying it, because I want you to get that feeling that we're having a conversation. It's interesting, right? That's where I'm not struggling, but that's where I'm hoping to improve, is to make it sound like we're having a conversation, which is how my podcast has always been, but while also having the written format of the same thing. So anyway, that's just an interesting aside. So I hope I'm not sounding too monotone and boring. Okay, so I hope you can sort of see that progression between, you go inwards, you have a wintering phase of your life, you have no goals for a little while. Early motherhood is a perfect time for that. And then you start to emerge out and think, okay, well, who am I now? What do I actually want? What's coming up? Where am I headed? And then the other factor in terms of, developing or stretching your timelines is to, there are some things that are meant for when you're older. Like, can you trust that as a mother, your second spring will hold gifts that you are meant to wait for? So here's an interesting thing. I just recently read, not all of it, but some of a book called The Upgrade, which is by Dr. Luann Brizendine. And it's all about menopause, right? I'm really into perimenopause and menopause at the moment. I feel like it's an important thing, or something that I want to educate myself on, like what to expect over the next 10 years when that starts to happen. And I think, I'm sort of excited about like, okay, well, I'm in my late 30s. I've got young kids. It's possible. They call it the second spring, right? It's possible that when you're in your late 40s and 50s and 60s, you could have this whole other career that you haven't even thought of yet. Like, that's what I mean when I say life is not as urgent as it seems. We can be in the time. Like, if you want to have a good experience as a mother, just let yourself coast along in some aspects of your life and go all in on the mothering, knowing that if you're coasting along and ticking things slowly off, like this might not suit everybody, right? But if you're in middle career and you've got a job or you've got a small business or whatever it is, and you can continue that on at a certain pace, you can always grow that more later. Like, can you trust that? And here's an interesting fact. So I actually researched it, because she said the age group with the highest rate of people starting new businesses is women over 50. So I Googled it and I found an article from Forbes where it said, actually, it's true. Women in their 50s are twice as likely to start a business and be successful in that business than women in their 20s. So I think that really shows that, not everybody's going to be successful in their 20s. Like, you might fail all through your 20s and 30s and 40s in the sense of like what you might think is traditional success. But how, you never know what that is all teaching you, what you're getting out of that might mean you are successful in, let's redefine success. But like, let's say that you have a business and it, financially successful, or that you start doing something that you've truly always wanted to do, but that you're so much better at that. And it feels so much better doing it in your 50s and 60s because of everything you've experienced in the first half of your life. I think that's just so soothing for my soul, and I hope it is for yours as well, to be honest. Yeah. So the next thing is to say that the gifts waiting for you in your 50s require you to learn the lessons of the previous decades, which is what I just said. So if it does feel like the wheels are spinning, that you're making no progress, and every day just feels like relentless monotony and you feel stuck, maybe you're meant to. We live in this immediate world. It's easy to make meaning of feeling stagnant or stuck. And it's easy to feel like you're failing because it seems like you're not moving forward. But what if it's not true? Because not all growth is forward motion. Like, let's look back at your childhood experiences. How did those inform the way you approach motherhood, both the ways that you experienced good parenting and the ways that you choose to heal and do things differently because of the bad experiences that you had? Like, both of those things. Like, you needed to have a childhood experience to be able to decide how you want to be as a parent. What worked for you, what didn't. What about your early 20s? Like, did you party too much? Did you say yes in relationships that you wish you hadn't? Did you take jobs that felt soul destroying? And how did those experiences inform how you hold boundaries now, or how you make yourself energetically unavailable for certain kind of people, or what jobs you're willing to go for, or how exhausted you're willing to be, or the fact that you'll just say no to things when it doesn't feel good? Like, you have to learn how to say no by saying yes when you shouldn't have, and you learn those lessons. So you learn and grow over time. So what might you be currently learning now that will be necessary wisdom for what comes next? So that's how you stretch your timelines. You take a much longer timeline on what your life is. Life happens now, but it's very long if you're lucky. We are in a time where we can expect to live a long and hopefully mostly healthy life. So let's make the most of it by being in each moment and letting ourselves experience them each moment and be really in it, all the good, bad, and ugly. And like I said, I think that is how you feel fully fulfilled. And that's how you can reflect, when you're 80 or 90 or even 100, you can reflect on your life and be like, you know what, I nailed that. I loved my life. I had a great life. To me, that's really like, I don't know. I feel like emotional about that. But anyway, I'm going to love you and leave you on that one. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. Now, if you did, I would love you to come over to Substack. I'll leave the link in to this particular article in the show notes on your podcast player. But come over and subscribe, because I will be making it so you can subscribe to my newsletter, but it's on the website. So you can go to the Substack website, find me, Rachelle Glendon, How to Live Slow, subscribe, and anytime I post an email, I post a article, it will land in your inbox, or you can download the app. And there's a notes section, so I share like almost like an Instagram kind of feed there as well. And there's a community chat. So it's kind of like where I'm hoping to base myself. Eventually, there is a feature where you can upload audio as well. So eventually the podcast will also be in the Substack articles that I have. You'll be able to book your coaching directly on the Substack feed. When you go to the website, there'll be a button to book a meeting. You can do that way. I will be doing my Seasons of Slow, which is like a monthly subscription thing that you can do where we go through the seasons and we slow down over the 12-month period of a season. You'll be able to sign up for that, like at a really low-cost monthly subscription fee through Substack. I'll be getting rid of Kartra. Kartra is what I'm currently using as my email service provider and how I do all my payments and how I deliver all my courses. So in the next 3 months, I'll be migrating everything over to Substack, and I won't be using Kartra anymore because they charge me $100 a month and US. So it's about $130 or $140 a month that I pay for that. And that is actually ridiculous. I've got a special deal with them at the moment where it's half price because I've been with them for quite a while, but I don't need that. I don't need all the bells and whistles that they provide. And I feel like Substack is because I'm writing longer form content, I feel like it's better for your brain and your attention span to be on Substack over Facebook or Instagram or things like that, because all of the content there is only, literally you can go through and search other things and what other writers, but you also are only, you can choose to not see that stuff. Like you can subscribe to individual people and just see what they've written. And it's longer form, so it does take some time. It's like an old-fashioned newsletter or actually newspaper. And it's amazing. It's a really great way because they share the way that they do their business. I just really like it. I think it's a new evolution of the internet. We're going to be here in our digital lives. We may as well do it in a way that feels good. So that's why I'm on Substack. And I hope you join me over there. That's what I'm saying. That was the whole point of that. Come over there, subscribe over there so that we can connect even further. I also feel like the podcast is really hard to have conversations with the people who listen. Like, I know that there are some who message me on Instagram saying I loved the latest podcast or whatever, but majority of people, I would love to hear from you. So if you can come over to Substack and we can chat in the chat feed about each particular topic, I'd love that. That I really, really would. So please do follow up on that. And yeah, all right, well, enjoy. It's the end of April already. That is crazy. So we are heading into the depths of, it's nearly winter here and it's coming into summer in the Northern Hemisphere. One more month of this season. How amazing. I hope you're really well. Take care and I will speak with you really soon. Okay, bye. That's it for another episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to connect further, the show notes from today's episode, including all the social links and free resources, are over on my website, howtoliveslow.com/podcast. Have a beautiful week ahead and I'll speak with you again soon.